Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hey everybody, my name is Dave Luttrell. I am the Procurement Training Manager, and this is another Training Tuesday. Hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. Just want to remind you guys, if you are just joining us, please go ahead and mute yourself, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about the small purchase process. We received quite a bit of requests to go over these for these Training Tuesdays. So what I'm going to do is go through some of the actual conditions and those sorts of processes first, and then we'll go ahead and jump into BidBuy. So usually I think we want to have these Training Tuesdays be short and sweet, 15, 20 minutes probably, mostly just, provide some information and then allow you to ask questions. However, today might be a little bit longer, so if you're not interested in the BidBuy piece of it, we'll go through the slides that I just recently set out to the SPOs and APOs, and we'll go through them. Then once we'll get into the BidBuy process, some of you may jump off. So today may be a little bit longer than the usual Training Tuesday, but it is all very helpful information. So really a lot of the information that we're going to be walking through is going to be from the CPO Notice 2018-10, and there's a link in here in the slides as well. So first off, let's talk about the state agency small purchase designation. It's very important because each state agency needs to have that signed state agency small purchase designation document on file with the CPO's office, enable for you to be able to do these processes described below. And we'll get into for the agencies that do not have that designation document, we'll follow the procedures that we talk about in Condition 8. So we'll get into that in just a minute. Here's an example of what that small purchase designation letter looks like. It's signed by the SPO as well as the agency head, and has an effective date there. So, and we're going to talk about why that's important, because really essentially the procurement code speaks to procurement authority starting with the SPO at $1. However, the current CPO, Alan Daly, has decided that it's more efficient to have that procurement authority designated out to those for the smaller purchases less than $10,000. So really, it's going to make things more efficient from the small purchase process. So if you have this small purchase designation memo on file, any of those procurements that are less than $10,000 that are essentially not going through the SPO approval process, they need to have this small purchase designation memo inside every single procurement file. So we're going to talk about that. Actually, let me go back real quick. One question that we get quite a bit is, if a new SPO is assigned to an agency, do they need to have a new small purchase designation memo? The answer is no. If there's a new director, if there's a new APO, does the agency have to have a new one? The answer is no. It is on file, and those would need to be put into every procurement file, but you don't need a new one for every single time you have a change in the agency. Okay, so I'm not going to read this entire slide. You can go through it on your own if you'd like, but I do want to highlight one piece. This is from section 2155 in the procurement code, and it talks about the procurement file shall contain a written determination signed by the chief procurement officer or state purchasing officer, setting forth the reasoning for the contract award decision. So this is really important because the code specifically requires a written determination. So that's where that small purchase designation memo is going to come into play there. So now let's walk through some of the different conditions. We have a question here. Let me jump back out. A BOA is a contract, correct? Is a purchase order considered a contract? We send our own purchase orders for non-BidBuy procurements that do not require a vendor signature. Also, some vendors with a CMS master contract don't sign the PO generated by the PO. For those reasons, the PO doesn't seem to be a contract. Thus, for those type of small procurements, section 2155 would not apply, right? Okay, so let me go back to, there's a couple things here. Let me answer. A BOA is a contract. Yes, you are correct. Is a purchase order considered a contract? So that's a really good question. There seems to be some confusion about what that means. A purchase order in BidBuy, it's kind of the language that BidBuy comes up with, right? So at PO is essentially the contract, But for instance, if it's less than $20,000, the comptroller is not going to approve that if it's over $20,000 at the PO. So um, there are specific contract documents that are required for the comptroller to obligate those. If you have any specific questions about that, we could probably follow back up on that. But if it's less than 20 and not being obligated by the comptroller, then yes, the PO document would apply. Let's see, let me get back in here. Some vendors with a CMS master contract don't sign the PO generated by the PO. For those reasons, the PO doesn't seem to be a contract. Thus, for those type of small procurements, Section 2155 would not apply, right? Uh, Now that because the original contract, that's a release off of a contract, it would not apply. So this would be for a small purchase. So that master contract was not a small purchase.
Public
So
Health. I am away from my desk right
where
now.
there's a different.
If you could please leave your name, your number, a brief message, I will return your call as soon as possible. Thank you and have a great day.
Record your message at the tone. When you are finished, hang up or
It
press
did, but I
pound
don't
for
know
more
who it
options.
was.
Okay, well, I'll just go through and we'll just leave her a message. Hello. I'll just go through and mute these as quickly as I can. If not, she might just have a recording of our Training Tuesday, which is always going to be good, right? Okay. So yeah, so a release off master is not going to apply here. These are specifically for small purchases. So let's jump back in here and let's go through our different conditions. So for those small purchases that are less than $2,000, they're not set aside for small businesses. The state agency can source a single small business or any small business. There's no waiver that's required. The SPO is not involved. However, the state agency small purchase designation memo that serves as that written determination that we talked about earlier, it serves as the written determination for awarding the contract. So even though, the procurement code talks about having a procurement file for everything. So even though it's less than $2,000, there still needs to be that small purchase designation memo. And just as a reminder, the $2,000 is the threshold at which all your purchases need to go through BidBuy. Now, however, if it's less than $2,000 and your agency has decided to use BidBuy for all procurements, you can certainly do that as well. And some agencies are taking advantage of that. So our next condition here is a small purchase from $2,000 to $10,000. These are set aside for small businesses that are registered for the Small Business Set Aside Program. These are those general procurements that when neither emergency nor sole source conditions exist, the state agency can source a single small business vendor. So there has been some confusion about what this means. So if it's between 2,000 and 10,000, the agency can source a single small business vendor. Now, however, I will say this. Some agency guidance and directives have said that they need to go to all small businesses in that range. So that's something that you'll want to really confirm with your agency. From the CPO's perspective, this is our process that we've laid out. However, if there's any time that there's going to be can be more restrictive from your agency, that's certainly okay because from the agency standpoint, it's just providing more competition. So the CPO's office is certainly fine with that. However, so the state agency can source a single small business vendor. All the small business vendors with the NIGP codes selected must be solicited unless that agency is able to source a single small business vendor. So there's kind of three different tiers here. If you know of a small business vendor that can provide that for you, you can go directly to them. At that point, if you can't identify a single small business vendor, you're going to go to all the small business vendors with that NIGP code or multiple NIGP codes as well. So a non-small business vendor can be used only after all those required small business vendors have been solicited and determined unacceptable. So then there is a waiver at that point. If say you go out to small businesses and you receive no quotes, or if they're unreasonably high, a small business waiver would then be approved by the agency. So the agency is going to authorize that small business waiver. Since it's less than $10,000, there's no SPO involvement. once again, that small purchase designation memo serves as the written determination. So I'll say that a handful of times here. Just as a reminder, that written determination comes from the code. So it's a document that will need to be in all those procurements less than $10,000 where an SPO is not providing approval. Okay, so let's go to our next condition. Now this is a small purchase with emergency conditions, 2,000 to 10,000. The state agency determines if a small purchase meets those emergency conditions. Once again, the state agency may source a single small business or non-small business vendor when those emergency conditions exist. Once again, it's less than $10,000, so there's no SPO involvement. And once again, that small purchase designation memo serves as the written determination. I have an email or a question. Will you share the PowerPoint after the WebEx, please? Yes, and I have an email there. I did send it out to the SBOs and APOs. However, because we want to provide this link, we want to make it available to all state agency personnel. So people are going to be coming and going. I don't know everyone who is on the WebEx. However, I can go back and find that, and so you may end up receiving multiple emails here, but I wanted to get it out sooner to the APOs and SPOs, and I'll follow it up with everybody on the call today as well. So I will send it out to everybody. I do want to make
Can you hear me?
a clarifying note here with the small purchase with emergency conditions versus a emergency. So we want to be clear that sometimes language, we can, certain terms will be, when we're talking about these things, we'll say, or I've heard agencies say, a small emergency, or they'll talk about an emergency. I just want to be very clear that these are all small purchases. So this is a small purchase procurement method with emergency conditions, as well as a small purchase with sole source conditions. Those other two procurement methods, emergency and sole source, have a whole separate, there's a whole separate requirement involved there. So I just want to be very clear here. And just as a reminder, if you're on the call and you're not muted, please go ahead and mute yourself. Thanks. All right, so now next condition is a small purchase with sole source conditions. Like I said before, this is to delineate from a sole source where there needs to be a sole source hearing, it's publicly posted, etc. This is a small purchase with sole source conditions. So the state agency determines if a small purchase meets the sole source conditions, and you'll complete that small purchase with sole source conditions form. That's a form that we went over the last couple weeks. That's out on the CPO's website. And if you have any questions about that, we can always circle back and talk about that as well. Really, in essence, what that is doing is providing, all the information for the agency or an SPO if it's over $10,000. That same information that they're going to be asking anyway. It's going to make it a little bit easier because that, we'll ask those questions, and it makes it a little bit more consistent across all state agencies. Once again, if you're not on mute, would you mind muting yourself? I can't catch up with everybody as I'm kind of muting along here. Thank you. Okay, so that the agency completes that small purchase with sole source conditions form. With those sole source conditions, of course, you can source a single small business or a non-small business, because those sole source conditions mean that no other vendor can provide that commodity or service. Since it's less than $10,000, no SPO involvement is required. And then once again, I sound like a broken record, but it's very important that that state agency small purchase designation memo serves as the written determination and then needs to be attached within BidBuy. Since this is greater than $2,000, it will be in BidBuy. Okay, so now we have a small purchase, $10,000 to $100,000. Now this is where I would venture to guess a lot of state agencies, there's such a wide gap there between the 10,000 and 100. So this will be a very important process here. These are set aside for small businesses. Once again, these are those general small purchases where emergency or sole source conditions do not exist. Now, if it's greater than $10,000, all small business vendors with the selected NIGP code must be solicited. And there's the interface that automatically grabs those small businesses in BidBuy, and we'll walk through that process here in a little bit. So a non-small business vendor can be used only after all the required small business vendors have been solicited and determined unacceptable, or another justification warrants the use of a non-small business vendor. And since it's greater than $10,000, the SPO is going to sign that waiver. The approval is required by the SPO. Okay, so now we have a small purchase with emergency conditions greater than $10,000 up to the small purchase threshold, which is 100. The state agency can source a single small business or a non-small business. However, now the SPO approval is required since it's greater than 10. So we kind of have a theme here. If it's less than 10, the SPO is not providing approvals. If it's greater than 10, the SPO is providing approvals. And there's no small business waiver required for emergency conditions, small purchase with emergency conditions or small purchase with sole source conditions. Now that is a change from last fall. If you're new to procurement, you're not going to need to worry about this being a change. However, we do get that question sometimes. Isn't there a waiver required for a small purchase with emergency conditions? The answer is no, no longer. Similarly, the small purchase with sole source conditions from 10,000 to 100,000. The state agency can source a single small business or a non-small business. Once again, this is with sole source conditions, so only this vendor can provide that item or service. Complete that small purchase with sole source conditions form. Like we talked about before, those are the same questions that an SPO is going to be asking anyway. So we have a new form that just provides those questions for you to provide consistency across all the agencies. And since it's greater than $10,000, the approval path in BidBuy is automatically going to hit your SPO, and there's no small business waiver. So the question that we get quite a bit is, in this particular instance, is that small purchase, the full source conditions form, is taking the place of the small business waiver that used to be required. That answer is correct. Okay, so, and here's a table that if you ever have any questions, or you can go back and take a look at this, that really kind of lays down every single one of the conditions we just talked about, all the different procurement conditions, the dollar value, is this set aside for small businesses? Is there a waiver required? And then who signs that waiver and approves it? I'm going to go back to this small business set aside here. And this kind of ties in with one addition that we made a couple weeks ago in BidBuy that you might have seen the change in terms of talking about, is this, it used to say, is this subject to a small business set aside? Now it says, is this a small business, or is this a small business set aside procurement? And so this answer kind of lines up with that. We would say, if it's an emergency, a small purchase with emergency conditions, or it's a small purchase with sole source conditions, it's not set aside for small businesses. So that's where this column here provides that information. Okay, so I'm not going to go too deep into this if you don't have a small purchase designation memo. I think most agencies do. However, if you do not have a small purchase designation memo, and your APO or SPO could provide that information for you if you're one of those agencies that does not have a small purchase designation memo. There's just another process, because once again, that written determination needs to be provided by the SPO if you don't have the small purchase designation memo. So it talks about submitting a monthly report with the date of the award, the name of the vendor, the estimated contract value, the description of the supplier service, and whether the awarded vendor is in the small business set aside program. And that SPO is going to provide the written determination for each one of those small purchases. If you have any specific questions about this, if you do not have your small purchase designation memo as an agency, we could follow up and circle back and hit that. So please reach out to me. Okay, so that kind of follows up or ends the slide portion of this. Like I said, we always want to keep these probably about 20 minutes, so we're good there. I am going to go ahead and jump into BidBuy now and walk through that process. So if it's applicable for you to stay on, please do. If not, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next Tuesday. I am going to go ahead and continue recording, though, so we can keep that a part of where we post it out to the CPO site. We do have a question. How long is the designation memo good for? There's not an expiration date for it. You don't need a new one if you have a new SPO or a new APO or a new agency head. It is just it is good for there's no debt, there's no end. Let's see. Will a new CPO notice be issued to reflect the slight changes that appear on your slides? Yes, there will be a forthcoming CPO notice that will talk about the that small purchase with sole source conditions form. However, it's out there now. Feel free to use it. While we're in this little transition time, I would say this, that those are the questions that an SPO is asking for anyway. If it's not specifically on that form at this time, it will be in the future needed because that CPO notice will be forthcoming. Okay, so I'm going to go out to BidBuy and I'll go to our training environment and I'm just going to start walking through our small purchase process. So you'll notice that we're in the training environment, how it's green. It's very similar to our production environment, but it's just slightly different. So now we have also, a reminder that we have the small purchase job aids out there on the CPO's website. You can just walk through those job aids as well. But the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go to Documents, Requisitions, New. Okay, so you kind of just hover over the documents, get the requisitions, and I'm going to slide over to New, and now I have a new requisition document, and I'm going to start completing all the fields. So I might move through this fairly quickly because I'm guessing this is a refresher for many of you. But if you do have any specific questions about to do small purchases, I'm always available to do a WebEx or come out to your agency, etc., to provide more in-depth small purchase training. So what we're going to do is we're going to complete all these tabs, starting from the General tab and moving left to right. And everything that has an asterisk next to it is a required field. So it won't allow you, the system was not going to allow you to save and continue and move through the documents without completing that field. So I like to buy guitars, so I'm going to buy a guitar. Department and location. We'll just pick one there. Our location. Each agency is going to have a different lockdown or a drop down, excuse me. So those are all pre-populated. Many of you will only have the one. Requisition type, this is going to be an open market. If we were going to do a release, that would be a release off of a master contract, which would be a different procurement method. Type code. Now this is something that is kind of a classification for your procurement because this is searchable. So, you could always do reporting off of, okay, how many commodities did we buy, or all those different procurements, telecom, pharmaceuticals, etc. We'll pick general services. The purchaser, since I'm doing it, it automatically fills my information. And some of this other information here, release, begin date, end date, isn't applicable here. So we'll go ahead and move on. Save and continue. And now you're going to see that I have a requisition number at the top here. Okay, now I'm just going to move to our left from all our items, or from all our tabs. So we get into the items tab. I'm going to add an open market item. Why don't we do a procurement less than $10,000 to start with, and then we can always come back and do another one. So we're going to say I love the training environment because I can act like I'm buying something that I want. I actually want this, so I want a PRS DGT gold top. That currently my wife says I cannot buy, so we'll buy it in BidBuy. The unit cost, we're going to estimate that at about $3,000. And our unit of measure is each. You have a drop down here that has a ton of different options. There is an appendix on the CPO's website where all the BidBuy training resources that I'll show you in a little bit, where you can go back and see what each one of those mean. So we have our quantity, our cost, our unit of measure. Now we're going to put in our NIGP code. Now the NIGP code is very important because this is how drives all of what the vendors receive. So if I'm a vendor, I'm going in to register for BidBuy, or if I'm coming from the IPG, I'm going to go in. I want to pick all the NIGP codes that I want to be notified for. Okay. So there's a couple different ways. If I know the NIGP code, I can just type it in here. However, if I don't know it, I have a drop down that I can pick that way. Or if I want to search, I can search this thing. It brings up an advanced search. So there's a couple different ways to get your NIGP codes there. I don't know what it is, so I'm going to go into the NIGP keyword, and I'm going to pick guitar. And then we have a couple different options here. So I'm going to pick 580, 80, stringed instruments, etc. So now you're going to see that we have our NIGP code there, and I can save and add new if I'm going to do multiple line items, or save and exit, and that'll take me back out. And so since we're only buying the one guitar, we're just going to do the one save and exit. Just as a reminder, if you're not muted, can you go ahead and mute yourself, please? Thanks. Okay, so now vendors is where we're going to look up and add our vendors. However, since we still have some information to be able to add, and this is less than $10,000, we're going to skip this tab for now and come back to it and add our vendors at a later date. So, and really the difference here is if it's less than $10,000, we go requisition straight to PO. If it is greater than $10,000, it will go requisition to bid to PO. So if it's greater than 10, we're going to add the vendors at the bid stage because that vendor pool could change between the time that we're adding our requisition here and when we actually contact our vendors. But since this is less than $10,000, we will end up putting it here at the requisition stage, but we want to make sure we have all our other information laid out. So we'll skip that for now and come right back to it. Our address tab, that's going to be pre-populated. However, if you have a ship to address that's different than your bill to address, you would go ahead and put that there. So within your agency that's already all pre-populated, you can go in and select different vendors. For what we have here, I only have the one address. So it'll be slightly different for me versus some of the agencies. The accounting tab. Now the accounting tab, what's very important about this tab is that it drives all of the approval paths. So you can see that I have a validation error here. What that does is it lets me know I'm not going to be able to move forward. I'm not going to be able to save and continue this because we have a red validation error there. So the accounting tab, what it does is it takes the estimated value of your procurement and says, all right, it's going to go, the approval paths are going to go to the, what are pre-populated within your agency. So if it was greater than $10,000, it's going to say, yep, I'm going to go to the SPO. If it's less than $10,000, it'll do just the agency approval paths, as well as, CMS boss, et cetera. So every agency has an approval path that's pre-populated and set up for you. So how we do that is we go into our accounting tab. We are going to select the magnifying glass and click find it to get our different options. So we have all these different special procurement types. In this instance, we're actually going to pick not applicable, and I would suspect that most of the time it will be not applicable. Now, in the production environment, we do have a handful of more options here, but in the training environment, we just have these at this time. So not applicable, and then we're always going to do this little two-step process where we're going to say based on percentages, and then we're going to rebuild for all items. So what we're doing is we're saving, we're going to apply 100%, if you see over here to the right, this percentage here. We're going to apply the 100% of this procurement to a not applicable accounting code. So we already clicked save based on percentages. Now we're going to rebuild for all items. And what that does is it takes all this accounting information and applies it back to the item level. So if you would go back to this item level now, you would see that it has if I open it up, you have the application of the accounting. So it brings that accounting to the item level. But really all you need to know is that you're going to select your special procurement type. In this instance, it's not applicable. Say based on percentages, and then rebuild for all items. That'll be the same process every single time. Routing, you won't see any routing at this time because routing is there for more about looking back into the procurement. It would say, at what different times it hit the different approval paths. So at this time, it doesn't we won't do anything there. The attachments, this is where you'll provide, and in the job aid, it lays out what would need to be attached here. For instance, you would have your procurement justification form. You would have any of the other specific documents. If you put in an RFQ, we would have any of those sorts of documents. So that's laid out in the job aids. I'm not going to deep dive very much here in the attachments because it could be different. But for our instance, we're going to say we want to put in, just to show you the process, we click Add File. Then I'm going to choose File, and then it's going to go into my computer, and I can select a document to attach. Maybe. There it goes. Let's add a picture. Okay, so then you can save and exit. You can put a description there. Let's say this is our RFQ document, and then I can save and exit. If I save and exit, it takes me out. If I save and continue, it keeps me on this page. So I'll click Save and Exit. Now I'm going to have the opportunity to show this to vendor or not show to vendor. So we have this box right here. It shows all my attachments. If I can go back and open it up if I'd like, have the description, and then show to vendor. So there'll be a lot of times that internal documents, for instance, say this was the procurement justification form, I would uncheck that and click Save and Continue. Any documents that are just going to be for the file, for instance, the small purchase designation memo could be attached here since it's less than 10. That would also be not show to vendor. And all those different show to vendor, not show to vendor are laid out in the job aids too, so you can really just follow that. But for instance, this is going to be our RFQ. I do want to show that to the vendor so they know what I'm looking for. And then we can move on. So the notes tab, this is really just, we talk about it as like a yellow sticky note for the procurement file. You can add something here. You'll really find different ways to utilize this. If you need to just put a note into the file, you can do that. It is purely just internal. Vendors can't see this. However, anybody that does have access to this document can see the notes tab. So any other approvers, anybody that has access to this document, you can do that. Also, you can delete the notes as well. And that's really just a functionality that's going to be on every single, at the rec, at the bid, etc. You can add different notes to the procurement file. Reminders. This is a functionality that allows you to, email someone else to take a look at the document. This is another situation where you'll find good ways to use the reminders functionality. For instance, for those that are greater than $50,000, we remind as an SPO, we remind PPB that there are disclosures there. If it's a situation where we require a PPB waiver, this is how we utilize that functionality as well. So what you would do is, let's say, or for instance, hey, this is going to be due. This is probably the best way that I've seen it from an agency standpoint is this bid is due, or the quotes are due Friday, let's say. I'm going to put quotes are due, and then you remind yourself. So that's something I think is a good way to use the reminders tab. If you can select the days prior to remind, so let's say it's due this date, but you want to be reminded the day before, you could put a 1 there. If you put 0, it's going to automatically send the reminder. And then you can select send email there. All right, so that's the way I've seen it utilized from the agency standpoint quite a bit. And I got a question. Yes, should you also attach the SP designation letter since this is the procurement file? Yes, definitely. So now we have everything here. We have our attachments. Now we want to go out and send our RFQ to our vendors. we'll go back to our vendors. And the reason we do this is because there was additional information there, as well as say you could have started a requisition last week, 2 weeks ago. However, that vendor pool is always changing. So our small business vendors list is changing daily. Whether they are renewing, they could be expired. There's new vendors always coming into the pool. So that's why we always do everything and wait till before selecting our vendors until it's time to actually send it out to the vendors. Okay, so now we're going to pick publish informal bid on the web. We are going to, it's going to be restricted, right? Because we're only selecting the vendors. We only want the vendors on this list to be able to see it. We don't want it to go out to the entire public. Save and continue there. And then we need to add in our bid ending date. So this will say, and so we select the time first, and then the date. And then we'll save and continue. Oh, it just turned to 9:38. It's trying to get the timing just right. So we'll say it's going to be in a minute. Save and continue. Normally for these small purchases, if it's something that's off the shelf, you're looking 3 to 5 days. If it's something that requires more information on the part of the vendor, that could be a little bit further, more than 5 days. But the standard is about 3 to 5 days. So here, this is where we would search our vendors. So we're going to look up that 58080. So we're going to get, once again, this is going to grab all our small business vendors with that NIGP code. Now, small business set aside, we want to select yes. So what this is going to do is going to select all the small business vendors with that NIGP code. We will click find it. And since it's a training environment, we don't have any small business vendors loaded because that changes all the time. So just for our training purposes, we'll put in Dave. I know we have a couple here. So we have Dave's Guitar Shack, Dave's Guitar Shop. Here we go. But normally what that would bring up would be all of the small business vendors with that NIGP code. Okay, so now you have our list. This is who we're going to send it out to. Now you can see that we have a new button down here that says notify vendors. Oh, the bid ending date has to be later than today. Almost had it by a minute. Okay, so we have notify vendors. Save, continue. And now I'm going to notify the vendors. It's going to bring up who we're going to send this to. We're going to click the top box because we want to send to all of them. Send notification to selected vendors. And then this is going to give you an example of what the vendor sees. So a vendor is seeing this, an informal quote request has been sent to you, et cetera, et cetera. And then it send the notification. So that's going to allow them to, we want to click OK. We don't want to make any changes. And now you get a confirmation. So that vendor just received an email that says, there's we're requesting a quote, et cetera, and then they would go in and either send in a paper quote, or hopefully what we're seeing is more vendors actually utilizing the system. So now if I would go back to our quote, now you can see over here to the right hand side, informal quote, create. Now if the small business vendor had put in a quote, you would see edit or view. So you could see, and since this is an informal bid, you can go in and see those quotes as they come in. On formal bids, it gets locked down and you can't see the prices until the bid opening date. So just to show you how you would do this, so we're going to create a vendor quote on their behalf. Say they emailed you back separately or they sent in a paper quote. You would go in and create a quote for them. and it's easy. It's as easy as whatever the price was. Let's say they came in at $3,200. Save and exit. Okay, so now what we're going to see once this refreshes is over here on the right hand side, you see that it says view, edit. So that means that a vendor, you had put it on their behalf or the vendor had submitted. So just so you can see that we have two of them, I'm going to do this again. Let's say this vendor came in at 3,100. Now what you're going to see is you can select a recommended vendor. So if you go into the bottom down here, now what you're going to see is there's a new button. This is called the informal quote tabulation. So you wouldn't have had a chance to see this until quotes started coming in. So now we'll select that. And what this is going to do is going to show the pricing. It's actually going to highlight in green and put two asterisks next to the low price. Since this is a small purchase, it has to go to the low price. So we're going to select here and we're going to apply the pricing. This is saying, you're going to apply the quantity, unit cost, unit measure to the corresponding requisition items. That's exactly what we want to do. And now we can close the window. So now what you're going to see here, once we get back to our vendors tab, now we have the recommended column. We have a recommended vendor. Now you still have to submit this to through the approval paths. But what you're saying is, we've received these quotes. We're recommending that this vendor be awarded. So at this point, you can go and submit this for approval, and it's going to go through the appropriate approval paths. Okay, so we get to the summary tab. You can just review all the information, make sure everything is correct. What we're saying is we do have a recommended vendor. You can see our attachments, you can see the reminders list, etc., and then we are going to submit for approval. Now, in the training approval path, they're not set up because we want to be able to provide training and move through different statuses quickly. So normally what you would see is you would see the next person that it's going to, and you would click save and continue, or you would click continue. But since we're in the training environment, we're just going to go ahead and automatically approve this. If you do see this screen pop up, what that means is, so going back to our accounting tab, what that means is the accounting tab wasn't done correctly. So you will always see somebody that's next in your approval path. If you do see this, cancel and exit, go back and redo your accounting tab. But this looks good, so we're going to go ahead and save and continue. So now we're in the right-hand side with where all those statuses are. It was in progress. Now it says it's ready for purchasing. So it's been approved. As the purchaser, I received, so I'm the purchaser here. As the purchaser, I just received a notification email saying, yes, this was approved, and now we can convert this to bid or convert to purchase order. So now going back to our different thresholds, if it's a small purchase that's less than $10,000, we're just going from the requisition directly to the PO. We're not going to do the bid stage. So that's something that it can be confusing. So I just want to be very, very clear that you don't need to go to the bid stage if it's less than $10,000. And the problem is, if you do convert it to bid, it could end up being kind of out in kind of purgatory because it's not hitting the proper approval paths, and so it could just be sitting. And we want that to move directly. Since it's less than $10,000, it should move quicker through BidBuy. So we're going to convert this to purchase order since it's less than $10,000, and then we will go ahead and process that purchase order. So we want to convert this requisition to a purchase order. Since this is a big action in BidBuy, it pops up that "Are you sure?" pop-up window. Yes, I'm sure. And now we're going to have some options here of what kind of purchase order we want to do. In this case, I want to use a single PO using the header recommended vendor. So our header recommended vendor is Dave's Guitar Shack that we recommended at the requisition stage. Okay, and it defaults to include vendor informal quote attachments. We always want to keep that there because we want to include all the attachments as it moves into the purchase order. So now we're going to convert to purchase order. And it's currently in the queue to be processed. And now what you're going to see in the top right-hand side is now we are in one RGP, which is gone to purchase order. And now we have a new hyperlink here. So what's great about the system is all the hyperlinks within the system can connect every single status. So you can start from a PO and work all the way back through the bid, back to the rec, or you can link from the rec to the PO back to the rec, etc. So we have our hyperlink. I'm going to go to the purchase order hyperlink, and now we'll process the PO. Now it's going to start you on the summary tab, and it begins with all the overall validation errors that are there. That's exactly the way it's supposed to be. It's just letting you know, hey, there are all these things that need to be added that weren't added at the requisition. So we will go back once again from our general tab, and we're going to add all the documentation as well as fill out the fields that need to be completed. Okay, so once again, all of our asterisks are the ones that need to be completed. Our type code, so it's also going to bring over everything from the requisition. We're just adding additional information. So our type code, this was the procurement method. It was a small purchase. Let's see, publication date, special procurement type. If it was emergency sole source of state use, that's where you can add that there. Is this a small business set aside procurement? So this is that language that we talked about a little bit earlier. Yes, it is. Now, are you utilizing an active registered small business set aside vendor? Yes, we are. The only instance where you would say that that's if it's, we go back, if it says no, if it's not a set aside procurement, now that you don't have the option to ask about the small business vendor. So we say yes, and then it brings up that extra question. Yes, we are. Actual contract begin and end date. You know, depending on if this was a service, for instance, you actually have contract end dates. But we're going to say that, you know, they sent it to me on Friday. Now, depending on what that contract end date would look like, it could be different. Fiscal year of obligation, 2020. Is this a master contract? It defaults to no. We don't need to change that. There's no BEP, VBP participation goals since this is a small purchase. And I'll save and continue. Okay, so I'll just double check these, make sure there's nothing that needs to be added. At the items tab, we're not adding anything at the PO. At the vendor's already been brought over, so we're not going to add anything to the vendor. Let's say something could have changed though in terms of, you know, where they need to ship it. That could be changed at this stage. So if something changed here from the ship to or bill to, or let's say it wasn't caught or something needs to be changed, you can still add it here at this time. The accounting tab wouldn't need to be, you know, nothing needs to be happening here at this point. Should have been brought back over. For some reason, it doesn't look like it was applied. So hey, we get a chance to show you how to do that again. Normally that wouldn't be the case. So we click on the magnifying glass, we click on find it, and we're going to click not applicable because we want to make sure it hits the right approval paths. But this is why we always double check, right? For some reason, normally you wouldn't have to redo the accounting, but this is why we double check. So I click not applicable, save based on percentages, and then rebuild for all items. So now that's going to rebuild it back to the item level on your accounting. And once that accounting transaction is done, we can go ahead and move forward. Routing, once again, you're not going to see routing on this document yet. If you were to look back on an older purchase order, you would see who approved at what time. Now attachments. Now this is where additional attachments could be in play. You know, since this is a small, less than $10,000, you wouldn't have certain things that would need to be attached. So let's say since it's less than 10, we would need to have the certifications would need to be a part of that on any purchase. You also have the option to put in confidential for these documents. If you have any other agency-specific documents, any other internal approvals that are happening, You can click confidential, whether we're showing to vendor or not. Those are all very laid out and very clear on the job aid. But let's say, for instance, this was greater than $50,000. Now you're going to have, Forms B. Well, Forms B would be a part of here, I guess, because they're in the Small Business Set Aside program. So let me go back and let's say you would add that Forms B. For instance, if it was greater than 50, you'd have potentially Forms A if it was not going to a small business. And as the value of the procurement goes higher, there's additional documentation that would need to be there. But since this is only $3,100, nothing else is needed at this time. Notes, we talked about the notes. That's just a kind of a sticky note for you to go into. If you needed to add any additional information about the procurement, you can do that here. Change orders. Now we haven't seen this tab yet. There are no change orders at this time because this is a in progress status. Once that status moves to sent and something needs to be changed on the purchase order, for instance, maybe you ran into an SAP error or some of those sorts of things, you can go back and change the document by doing a change order. Now, this is the language that the system uses for, sometimes we'll talk about change orders in BidBuy versus a change order on a specific contract document. There are two different things. They would be done similarly. However, doing a change order to the procurement file could be something as simple as, oh, I forgot to put it in this document. I'm just adding it to the procurement file. Reminders. We talked about the reminders tab. If you wanted to add somebody else in the reminders, you can do that at this time. And then summary, and then we will submit for approval. Okay, so I'm just double checking everything that's there. I don't have any overall validation errors. Now I'm going to submit for approval. Once again, you won't see this screen because you have approval paths that are already set up in your agency. You would see who's the next person to approve. But since we're in the training environment, just to show you, I'll go ahead and automatically approve this. Okay, now you're going to see that it's in ready to send. So let's say it's been later on in the day, it's moved through the approval paths, etc. As the purchaser, I receive notification again that it was approved. Now I'm going to go ahead and send it to the vendor. So we have a couple different options here. We have send email and notify vendor, or set to printed status. So that set to printed status it doesn't send the email to the vendor. It does just move it to the sent status. But I want to send my email to Dave's Guitar Shack saying, yes, I want that guitar. Send it to me ASAP. Save and continue. And now you're going to see my status change to sent. So this status 3PS sent is the all clear that everything has been sent to the vendor. And that's really the end of the process at that point. So I know that took quite a bit, and I potentially could be moving fairly quickly through that. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll leave the line open here for a little bit. This was recorded as well, and it's going to be posted out to the CPO GS website. As always, I was showing you I want to show you the training resources page. So you can always go out and take a look at the job aids, because that's going to be something that is very, let's see, where is that? It's going to be very important. So you can always go back and utilize the latest version too. Okay, so we want you to go out to this website. We're going to scroll down. Here's all the different job aids that are there. So what we did today was a small purchase under $10,000. So just to give you a little clue of what was going on there. Maybe. Oh, there it is. So these were updated last week. Maybe the week before. Come on, you can do it. Okay, so I don't know why this isn't coming up. There it is. So here's an example of the new, so this is the new job aid. So since this is less than $10,000, we went to requisition straight to purchase order. And as you walk through each one of these tabs, it's going to be very clear here. So if you haven't had a chance to walk through these, go back out and do that. Here's an example of what in the attachments tab, what documents could be there, which ones, whether it's show to vendor or not, etc. Okay, so you can just walk all the way through there. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But since we're kind of up against the 10 o'clock hour, I'm not going to go in and do a small purchase over 10. However, if you'd like for me to do that, contact me. We can set up a WebEx or a meeting potentially out at your agency. If we could do that, I'd be happy to do that. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. I guess we'll see you next Tuesday. Have a great week.